Hello and welcome to our customer service and metrics and KPI webinar. Today, we're excited to have Kevin Horman joining us from DocuSign, and we have I think, a really exciting agenda. This is part of the webinar series that we've been doing at Y Meadows, and if those of you who are interested afterwards in seeing some of the prior webinars, please put a note in the chat and we'll be happy to reach out to you with some links from some of the earlier sessions. So I'm Alan Rich. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Y Meadows. Y Meadows is a company focused on machine learning and automation for the customer support space. And we're excited to have Kevin as our guest today. So Kevin, maybe you can give a little bit of your background.
Sure. Thanks, Alan, for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So yeah, I've worked at DocuSign here for 4 years. I lead our readiness and technologies team within the support organization. Before that, I spent 10 years in the financial industry, the last piece with Capital One. And then before that, I spent about 5 years at a Windermere Real Estate working in IT. So last 4 years at DocuSign has been great. Happy to share what we're doing here. So,
okay, wonderful, thank you. So I think just a little bit of housekeeping. So right now you probably noticed that you're muted. We're going to please enter any of your questions in the chat. We're going to go for about 30 minutes here in our discussion, and at the end of the discussion we've allocated another 15 minutes to answer the questions that come through the chat. So look forward to answering those questions afterwards. We have a number of, I think, really interesting topics today. We're going to learn a little bit about how DocuSign sets up their operations. But the key point, of course, is to learn what Kevin's been doing in the world of metrics and some of the challenges associated with that. So with that, I think we're going to get right into our discussion. So let me just turn off the slides over here. And Kevin, maybe you could just start off by telling us, I think most of us know DocuSign from one of your products, but I know that you have a lot more than the signature product that we're used to dealing with on such a daily basis. Maybe it'll tell us a little bit about DocuSign and the support operations here.
sure. Yeah, so DocuSign obviously has the e-signature product, which we are known for. There are a few others as well, CLM, contract lifecycle management, getting into other elements across all of the agreements. And what we help there, it depends on what you're looking to do, but across all the different agreements, we're there to help throughout the entire journey. The way we set up support, we offer B2B, obviously B2C as well, companies of all sizes, small up to the largest in the world. We have over 1 million customers, 1 billion users, throughout the globe, trusting DocuSign with their agreements. The way we set up support specifically is we have specializations across kind of the different products that you were alluding there. So we make sure that we have folks who are fully trained and enabled on the different pieces of the agreement platform. And then we had them spread across the globe and across different languages as well.
Wow. So kind of an interesting challenge, particularly that you're dealing with both enterprise and individual customers. Do you segment that way as well?
Yes, we do. So support is offered in a few different levels, depending on the company size and what they're really looking for. But yes, we operate a model that can help anyone who's looking to just sign a document up through the largest enterprises looking to integrate through APIs and everything else. So we have to be ready for whoever may be using the product and however way they're using it. So
okay, and just one more question on the sort of general support structure. I know you do both voice and messaging in written form.
Yep.
Do you have that in the same team, different teams? How do you organize that?
So yeah, we have a phone number that customers can call. We have a DocuSign support center where people can go enter cases. There's also a chat available to them on the support center as well. So we do written messages back through the support center or back through email, through chat, and then through phone. We'll take inbound phone calls, for a certain specific case type. And then we also do callback requests where they can submit the case again through the support center. We call back. We have our folks who are designated to do chat as kind of their own separate entity, and then
Mhm.
everybody else is put together to do either phone or written.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that background. So I think maybe we just start off with the basics and talk about metrics a little bit. What are some of the core metrics that you're using for your team, and what have you found to be particularly valuable?
Sure. So we focus on really the customer first and foremost and understanding if we are successful in helping them. So we have metrics that are geared towards, throughout the customer journey, where are they engaging with support, and are we making a difference there? So trying to understand the actual success of the customer when working with support, the customer's health. Um, and from there we get into more of an interaction understanding of metrics where there's a survey that we send to them that we get feedback on, and we try to read through all of the different feedback we get, look at the different scores, look at ones where maybe we had a lower score, and try to resolve that and follow back up with the customer. Understanding if the case got resolved. So we asked them that question as well as, did we able to resolve what you were contacting us about? And then we
Mhm.
have NPS and other type surveys as well to understand the promoters and detractors. Those are all kind of like the real metrics, the goals that we're trying to drive at. And then once we understand the outcome of the support experience and how the customer was successful, we think through the like, how did we get there piece of it. And those is where you'll find your more typical metrics in terms of the like first contact resolution or looking at a first day resolution, depending on the type of case that we're looking at. Of we may not be able to solve it immediately in the first touch, but if we are able to solve it within the first day, that is a success. And then looking at certain things and understanding cost. Are we doing this delivery efficiently, and looking at it from multiple lenses of different products and how we're supporting them, or different personas for customers, how we're supporting them by languages, accounts. Um, we have efficiency metrics around the cases closed, number of interactions worked, touches on those cases, our SLA agreements with customers, and make sure we're hitting those. And then your standard support metrics of like average speed to answer, handle time, and those types of things as well. To me, those are more of those metrics that are, yeah, you're looking at them and you want to understand where they are, but they're really kind of more guardrail KPIs to get you to really what you're trying to do at the end, which is drive the customer to be successful. And those are just more measurements along the way of how did you get to that endpoint.
So for looking at whether you've really been successful or not, are you relying primarily on survey
Uh,
results?
From the customer's feedback perspective, yes, we want to get feedback from the customer. So yes, we do send them surveys, but we have kind of like our own internal, like I'll say, in a broad sense, however a company would want to understand is the customer using their product successfully. However that company measures that is what we
Hmm.
really try to hope for and understand. So if it's they contacted support before they were even a customer, did they become a customer? Or if they are already a customer and they're contacting support, did they close their account afterwards? Did they decide to use more of the product? Did they buy more of the product, or any different features they're using or enabling, or just trying to understand what is happening with the customer at the customer level. Um, that is really what, at the end of the day, we're trying to be, is enabling the customer to be successful. So every
Okay,
company may look at that in a different way.
right. Let's drill down on that for just a moment, because that's really challenging to do. I mean, on day one, you get
It
a
is.
message and they, buy more of your product 2 weeks later. Or how have you tried to track and tie those things together?
It is very tricky.
Hmm.
And as long as you kind of put it to the side, who you're really giving credit to or attributing it to, and you're just looking more from a context of, I don't know if it was sales, I don't know if it was our pro serve department, I don't know if it was, the onboarding teams or if it was support, but like all of us together are working to make sure that the customer is successful. You can start to understand throughout the journey of the customer, who did they talk to, when did they talk to them, understand maybe what was done in that conversation, of capturing it all within the CRM system, understanding all those different touch points. And then you can start to see, all right, well, if this customer, you can almost A/B test it in a certain way. Of if they contact this group, this happens more often than not. If they contact this group, then this happens more often than not. If they use them both, then this happens. If you use all of them, then this happens. And so it's really understanding from a customer 360 standpoint, where are they interacting with us as an entire company, and not necessarily a specific department. But then when those departments are playing, what role at what point, you can start to understand if the collection of it is being successful.
Okay. Do you find that you try to connect the productivity kind of metrics that you're tracking around handle time and resolution times and number of touches to the outcomes? In other words, are those two metrics being connected through your systems?
So uh, I would say ideally, yes. It's not always the case. It gets tricky sometimes. But one thing with metrics, I guess what this whole conversation is about, is truly trying to understand the um, what is good and what is bad. If you can understand that, and that gets to be really tricky even of itself, because like handle time is a pretty typical metric for folks. If you say the word handle time, a lot of people think, oh, well, you want it to go down. But is going down good or bad? Maybe actually sometimes you really want it to go up. And you're running a project or running a program or trying to do something because you want to take advantage of that time that you're on the phone with the customer and you're working with them, because you're trying to make a larger impact in more of the long run. You're building a relationship with them, that you actually want your handle time to go up or your cost to go up. And those things sometimes are counterintuitive, but if you're looking towards the entire success of the customer and where you're making that impact, you could start to say, well, this touch point, if you can label the case in a certain way or document it in a certain way that said, all right, I talked to them about this thing. Did they then go do that thing? And if you can correlate those, and you took an extra 5, 10, 20, whatever minutes to deliver that value for the customer, then you're really starting to make a difference later on the customer journey. Um, and if you then think of support and what you're supposed to be doing is, what is the purpose of support at your company? Then that cost element starts to come into it, maybe more so, but you want to understand truly what you're getting for that cost
Mm-hmm.
at the
Mm-hmm.
end of it.
So to go back to your point on, it's good and bad as maybe depending on your business objectives, do you and your management team sort of look at at each of these metrics and try to talk that out?
So yes, for the metrics and even at the project level, because sometimes even within my own team, we're running projects that are optimizing a metric. Where one project maybe, I'll just use handle time again. We're trying to drive up handle time because we're trying to have more engaging conversations and discovering what the customer really needs to do to use DocuSign. And then we might be running another project at the same time that's geared towards trying to make the experts more efficient, and streamlining their processes and giving them better tools and enabling them, or training them, that would in theory make that conversation shorter because we're more effective at getting the
Effective.
information to
Yeah.
them. So those become tricky Or how do you measure if one was successful or not? Because one's going this way and one's going the other way. So if you can run them at different times, that's helpful. Um, or you can try to get to a place that says, from the process standpoint, I know this process took 2 minutes and now it only takes one. So I know I've saved a minute. And you can maybe try to leave it at that and not try to see if that minute truly showed up in the handle time. Like, did you actually go from 30 minutes to 29 minutes? Like, maybe that's not what you look at, and you're really just looking at this. I know this scenario is now removed from the equation, and then consider that your measurement of success. So it gets tricky for sure.
So we talked a little bit about how you use metrics to sort of judge a customer experience, but I'd like to explore a little bit how you use it to manage people on your teams. Are you looking at metrics down to the individual performer level? What do you do with those metrics? How do you share it with them?
So yes, ideally the agent, or we call them experts. Ideally, the experts' goals are aligned with the customer's goals, and the company's goals, and so they're all sequential, and you're all working towards the same thing. So having the customer in mind with what you're asking the agents to do, with what you're hoping to do as a company, I think is all very important. And from an expert point of view, there's really why are they working at your company? What are they trying to do? And having the metrics that you talk to them about hopefully align to that. So there's an interesting concept too, especially now that we're all working from home, of trying to understand, like, Alan, what are you really good at if you were an expert working with a customer? Chances are this individual is good at working with certain types of cases. Maybe they're really good at working with certain personas, like an admin at a company versus a power user versus an end user. Maybe you work better with one of those types of personas than another, or a really large company down to the consumer. Maybe you're better, it's at SMB customers, for example. And so if you can use metrics to really understand not just what is the agent's CSAT scores, but what are their CSAT scores for this type of person or this type of account, or even drilling into what their scores might be on a, like, Monday, for example. Like, when you work a case on Monday, do you get good scores? Or if you work on Friday, do you get lower scores? Or understanding just the human element of the person delivering the experience. If you can get into those types of things, it can be eye-opening even for the individual at the end of it. It was like, hey, you really personality-wise tend to go this way, this day of the week, or in the mornings or evenings, or those types of things that you can say, hey, you know what, we're going to put you into your one-on-one meetings with your managers every Friday afternoon because you're checked out when working with a customer or something like that, and so having a more detailed understanding down to the expert agent level can be really important when understanding the bigger picture and playing towards people's strengths and weaknesses.
One of the, I think, classic challenges with, managing people by metrics and telling them about it is that people will start to game the metrics. Famous stories about people hanging up on calls if they're starting to run too long and things like that. How do you deal with that challenge?
Well, I think one of the big things too would be seeing where you can automate stuff, I guess, which is in the Y Meadows wheelhouse as a company and stuff as well, is just trying to figure out where you can put a system in place or a process in place, automation, to remove the manual element, so that wouldn't come into play. So if you can automate how cases are delivered to somebody versus them cherry picking or gaming the system, if you will, then you can remove some of that through the automation. I think one other thing with the gaming the system is thinking through more of a composite scoring system or composite understanding of someone's performance. So it's not how many cases did you work, but what was the CSAT score on some of those cases, and how can you put them together that, longer cases, shorter cases, better scores, lower scores. if you can turn it into like a multiplier effect of, well, your score actually can only get here if you're doing the time right and you're getting the outcome of that performance right, then you get to this place. But if you're really fast or really slow, or your scores aren't high or low, then you don't want to necessarily reward the wrong behavior for certain things, but just like it's really the composite at the end of the day that you're looking for.
And what's your philosophy about tying these, even a composite score, to compensation, setting goals either at the individual or team level?
Uh, so compensation is an interesting one, from whether or not you're rewarding like an above and beyond behavior, and it's a monthly, quarterly, more of an incentive that you're delivering to somebody to incent a certain behavior, and be kind of deliberate about what you're trying to get out of the system with the compensation, versus a um, job description or salary piece of it, where you want to understand where you might be paying someone incrementally for something, and then whether or not you're then building in a baseline of, oh, well, I'm not going to do something unless you pay me extra for it. Uh, that's not necessarily what you want to drive with an incentive plan. You want to understand that, like, this is what your salary is paying, this is the expectations of the job. But if you go above and beyond, that's where you can start to increment and pay more money for it. And so there is a bit of a delicate balance there. Uh, Most of the compensation and stuff, though, ideally is being driven towards if the customer is successful. And if the customer is successful, then the company and the expert and everybody else is all successful at the same time. And so if you can get metrics geared towards the customer's success and having those be the same for the expert or the agent, and then you're going to be pushing them in the right direction, that ultimately they only are successful if the customer is.
So some of the metrics, are being shared internally, and you're down to the, productivity level of each individual expert. Some of the metrics you're building are things that you want to share with more senior management, with a wider management group. Maybe you can tell us a little bit how you think out that process and what you decide to share with the broader management team outside of your own operational group.
That comes down mainly to what our ultimate focus is. So our ultimate focus is usually right with the customer. Kind of what I was saying, that it really boils down to whether or not we're making an impact for the customer and how successful we are there. So most of the metrics that we're sharing, either up or down, revolve around that. And so going back into the, broader concept, are they using the product? Are they using different features of the product, adopting more of it, consuming more of it? So those are the kind of things that we like to understand. But the feedback is also very, very important, from upper management, and understanding, are customers happy with what we're delivering? Are we giving them the value they're looking for? Are we proactively preventing things within customers' cases and accounts? And are they healthy, and monitoring things, and uptime and everything else that goes into just the overall experience and value driven from support to the customer. And so really, I not to harp on it, but just like it comes back to the customer again, and whether or not we are enabling them as best as we can.
So you'd say that your focus is more on customer outcome and less on operational efficiency in what
Yes.
you're sharing with the management team.
Yes. Yep. I mean, we have to be mindful of the operational efficiency for sure. But again, we're not operating to be operationally efficient at the core of the what we're doing. That's not the primary focus. But those are important things to be mindful of, to know what you're doing and how you're measuring those things. But again, they're not the ultimate outcome.
How about interactions with the product management group? Do you tend to use some of the metrics to share with them, to show them where maybe parts of the product are causing disproportionate
Yes.
confusion or something like that?
Yes. No. So our specializations that we have set up within support, are geared around certain areas of the product. And so our teams within support that are focused on a specific space work very closely with our product department engineering and ensuring that we understand what they're building, they understand how the customers are using it, and providing that feedback loop. So that is really important. And if there's any feedback we get from customers, we're always trying to champion that back into the product itself.
Well, Y Meadows, as you know, is an automation company, and it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on how Y Meadows automation and just automation in general interacts with your thinking about metrics.
Yeah, sure. So I think automation helps at all three of those levels we've talked about, from the customer level to the expert agent level to what the company is trying to do from an efficiency standpoint, that there are often repeatable scenarios that exist in any business, and understanding what those are and then whether or not you can automate them is really important. So for us, one of the things we're looking at doing and putting together and building on and improving and continually looking at is getting the customer to the right expert at the right time, who's got the right knowledge and everything to be able to help the customer. So if we can understand what the customer is doing on the website, when the customer then submitting a case to us, and understanding everything that they wrote, using automation to understand or decipher the intent that the customer has when they're looking to get help, helps us then take that case and get it to the right person, the right specialty, or the right language, and understanding the regions and those types of things. And so the automation piece there is really important. Otherwise, we would just be dropping cases into a giant pool and then having to manually transfer it. And there is a lot of time that would go into reading what the customer wrote and understanding that, and then getting it to the right person. Cutting out all that manual work and automating it is a huge efficiency gain. And so those are really important from the routing perspective.
Great. And you think those will have a big impact on metrics as well? Will you see that flow through to the metric results?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're getting it to, so sometimes experts will just in general understand their area really well, but they also will understand other areas. And so sometimes working cases, you might start to work on something that you think or you want to help and be productive. But if we can take out that fine line of, oh, well, you could work this case, but don't, let's get it to this other space. If the automation is there, then you're going to be getting it to the right resource, the right time, the first time. And so, yeah, it's going to flow through to just understand your CSAT scores, your first day resolution scores, your handle times and those types of things will all be improved through that. And then also just from a standpoint of, writing can be really slow, but templates can be very fast. So if someone submits something and a system can read through what they wrote and say, oh, not only do I know where this goes, I think I actually know the answer to it, then you can start building templates or building suggestions or ideas or whatever that you want to give to the actual end expert or agent to say, all right, not only are you the right person, but here's an answer to help you solve this even quicker. And then that even like next layer of automation can really be beneficial as well. And then those will really push through to all the metrics.
Great. Let me just ask maybe one closing question on metrics. Is a lot of the metrics that you mentioned are sort of, call them traditional
Sure.
ways of thinking about it. Are there any that you've found maybe a little bit more unusual or different, or something that you came up with that you think has provided real insight that people that might, on our webinar might not be aware of?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head with that is just understanding every customer touch point, and if that touch point is providing value or not to the customer. Depending on where it is, maybe it starts with the phone system. Are you putting them through a giant pick list? Is there the ability to self-serve? in the phone system? Or is it your website? Is your website easily searchable? Are they able to find stuff? Is it easy to create a case? Is it harder to create a case? Are you gathering all the right information up front? Each of those like different touch points is starting to build this overall customer journey with support. When it gets into the experts and it turns into an assisted case, do they have everything they need from a people, process, and tool standpoint? Each of those things can come with a different measurement. At the website, maybe it's, yes, we understand that they're a session on our website, but are they really showing an intent of trying to find support? Can I measure that support intent? Okay, great. Then are they showing an intent to create a case? Okay, what does that case intent look like? And then, do they self-serve, and at what point are they self-serving? And you can start to get specific metrics through each of those different touch points. Even breaking down a phone call, you could understand, all right, did they get answered in a certain amount of time, but then did they get put on hold? When did they get put on hold? How many times did they get put on hold? What was the length of all of that time they were put on hold? Do we understand all the different that they have to call back in an hour or in a day, or those types of things, and understanding more of the complete experience and digging into the different touch points. I think looking through the entire journey and thinking at it from a broader sense can be really interesting. One of the things we did once back in my earlier career was thinking through Disneyland as an example. And when you think of going to Disneyland, all of it just tends to go to the characters and the rides and all the fun. But if you think through the experience of a person, it's parking. All right, how did you get there? Was the parking experience good? Did you find the food you were looking for, or did you have to garbage cans? Were they uniquely around you, or was you have to carry stuff with you? Did you have the bathrooms, being dirty? There's a lot more different things that goes into the overall experience, where you could leave and say, yeah, Disneyland was great, but actually the parking was awful and everything was dirty. I don't know, when you think of your company and your experience, are you thinking of it end to end and all of those little different touch points that may not be the bread and butter of your product, but they go into the overall customer experience?
Yes. Very good. Thank you very much. So just before we turn to some questions that have come through the chat, let me just say, if anybody who's on the webinar is interested in learning more about Y-Meadow's automation and how we can transform your customer experience as well as your agent's experience, please just put a note in the chat, and one of our people will get back to you. So with that, maybe we can start to look at some of the questions. Maybe you can talk about differentiating between leading and lagging metrics. Do you find that some of the things are good predictors and some of the things are looking at your business in the rearview mirror? Do you kind of think of things that way?
Well, yes, and it kind of goes back into the question you had around understanding, oh, if you talked onto this today, 2 weeks later, did that thing kind of happen? Yes or no? So we can start to get a sense of where things are going based off of understanding the different, I'll call it the taxonomy, or the what was the call about, asking the why, and understanding from an agent's perspective, all right, this is what I think this thing was about. And if we can get those from the expert and start to sort through them, and we're like, okay, well, for the customer, we just talked about X number, I'll just say 100 is a round number. We had 100 cases that were about this very specific topic. If we have 100 of those, will it show up as 20 something else later in the line? Like, of the 100 people that we talked about understanding templates, do 20 of them actually then start using templates? And so you can understand kind of where you're going from the experience you just delivered and what you think that should then lead to later down the line. And in support, we do it also from other parts of the company as well, of understanding what our sales department, is doing, or what customer success is doing, and understanding where we think that's going to come from a volume standpoint, and predicting, okay, well, if a number of people start adopting this type of product or buying this type of product, we're going to need to understand that this type of a case is going to come from those experiences typically, and start to do capacity planning and things around that as well, from understanding metrics that are happening outside of our department, and then what are their impacts on us as well.
Okay, good, thanks. One of our questions came in about whether you've developed different kinds of KPIs for people who are working at home. Has the experience of having, home-based agents affected your metrics?
So not really. We've kept them pretty much the same throughout the entire pandemic. Um, there's been different tools that we've adopted and switched to throughout it for a tracking perspective and understanding the different touch points and how folks are working on it. But what we're driving at from a KPI perspective did not matter if the person was in the office or was at home, because it's all attached to the customer at the end of it, and whether the customer is successful. And the customer being successful doesn't really matter where the expert is who's helping them. It's what they're helping them about and how they're driving that experience. So I would say some of our tooling has changed. So we've gotten some better insight into who's doing what, when, where, and why, and those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
But um, the KPIs truly, or the metrics that we're looking at, have not really changed. No.
Okay,
We've
good.
maybe gotten some more clarity on them, better
Think,
tracking, but like the metric is the
right.
same metric.
A couple of the questions here are not directly metric related, but I think because DocuSign has a reputation as a thought leader, they've asked you a couple other questions. So
Ooh, all
maybe
right.
I'll test.
Let's see if I can answer them.
So one of the questions is, I'm curious to know what you've done as a product enablement best practices for the customer support teams with different product areas.
Product enablement meaning like enabling support on the DocuSign product, or
yeah, I'm not sure what their intent is, but perhaps it may be, you have new releases coming out, you have new features coming out. What do you do with to keep the teams in sync?
Sure. Okay. So we DocuSign has three core releases throughout the year, or release 1, 2, and 3. But we're constantly updating the product almost on a weekly basis in some way across all of the agreements. So there is things constantly changing that we have to be ready for, and different environments that they go through in terms of being in a demo environment before going into general availability. And so we work within support very closely with our product team to really try to understand what's changing, why it's changing, who's going to have access to it, how many people do we think it's going to impact. And we try to get as hands-on as we possibly can, so that we can work on it. And then there's enablement that goes on throughout the entire company to help with, like our field enablement needs to know what's changing with the product. Our ProServe team needs to know. All the different, analysts and other things that we have would probably need to have some sort of understanding of it as well. So there's a lot of enablement that goes across a lot of different roles. We often find that in support, there is still this, kind of this last mile that we need to go in and take it from our own personal perspective of, all right, well, let's get in there and understand the troubleshooting element of it. So when customers have questions, how do we troubleshoot those questions? And so we'll get into it and try to build out documentation as much as we can. Sometimes it is externally facing because we think the customer really needs to have it. Sometimes it's more internally facing, like here's the steps you would need to go through as an expert to understand, or what to ask for from the customer. And so we have a constant enablement practice that goes through that. It might lead to like a full-blown instructor-led training. It could be a computer-based training. It could be a written knowledge article, again, internal, external. It could be an announcement that we're making or pushing out to the different experts. It all kind of depends on how big or small the change is. but we try to stay very tightly in line with our product and what is changing. And then really try to loop back from that of like, okay, well, we got all this, and oh, you didn't give it to us until a week before it actually came out. It wasn't enough time for us to do what we needed. We actually needed it at 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks, or and then have that kind of feedback loop to understand like how we continually can improve that. I don't know if that answers the question the right way, but
Okay, it's good. There's a
we
good
have to
answer
stay
then. Yeah,
very tight with them. Yes.
good. Did you another question that came up? Would you say first response time is more important than responding than the reply time to the resolution time, I guess? Should we prioritize new tickets untouched versus responding to replies in terms of SLAs?
Well, my first gut instinct on that is to ask about contracts and understanding what you have, if there is any contractual obligations to customers when it comes around like both of those types of scenarios. For instance, like if a customer is down and there's a P1 scenario, you probably have a very tight timeline to acknowledge the fact that that exists. And so getting some of the P1 things back and saying, yes, we've heard you, we know this is happening, we are working on it. That acknowledgement can be the most important thing there, because you're acknowledging the fact that there's a P1, and then you got to go work on, the resolution. And chances are the person working on a resolution in that is not the same person who's responding to the customer and letting them know. It's more happening in the background in the engineering department. But when we come to like the first day resolution, or when it comes to the first response and milestones and hitting the contractual obligations and those types of things, ideally those are one and the same. And that when you're providing a first response, you're providing a value to the customer in that first response. You're not sending an email that says, hi, I got it, thanks, I'll get back in touch with you. So that they are you are trying to solve the customer whatever they were contacting you about in that first touch. For us, there is often times where the customer didn't provide everything that we're going to need. There's going to need to be some sort of log or something that we're going to need to troubleshoot, or we're going to need some sort of further understanding from them. So sometimes that first touch is a more of a data due diligence to go get more information from the customer. But I mean, there is a balance there. I would want to say the most important thing though is getting to the end. It's getting to the customer satisfaction. It's getting them what they need, because that's really what you're trying to do. But you can't do that at a sacrificing of some sort of obligation that you have up front. They really need to go as a balance hand in hand.
I'll read you one more question here. He
Sure.
says, I'm in a manufacturing environment, limited number of customers with lots of technical and operations interactions. Do you have any tools or solutions that you would recommend, and any insights on these kind of customer service metrics that might apply in that area? So I listen to that question, and I think it's a lot like your enterprise customers, smaller number, very big customers that probably need a lot of interactions.
Yes, and in those, it turns into more of an understanding of the customer than it is the actual interaction itself sometimes. So how successful is the customer? Are they having to contact you a lot because of something that's particular to them, or is it something that's particular to the products? Understanding that balance there. Um, we have stuff that we do look at from a very customer specific standpoint of, is this customer successful, or is their status, the system up and running, did the release do anything to them, those types of things. So I would try to think, I guess, of those. If you have multiple interactions to one customer, is look at it from the customer's perspective more so than the interactions perspective. So I don't know that we have any specific tools that I would recommend for that. I mean, going back to the routing certain thing, if there are certain, like we have individuals who support specific clients. So we will have, customer success managers or technical customer success managers who own relationships with certain customers. So if cases are coming in and we're working on the routing elements of it, we're going to want to make sure we get them to like those people who know the customer really well. And that relationship is therefore really important. And leveraging that where you can. Sometimes you can't do it every time because you've got too many of them and you need to have more people help. So then it becomes important to understand the interaction and what's the nuance there. And if it's one that, no, this has to go to this person versus, oh, well, this is actually a scenario that could go somewhere else. That kind of goes back into the wide meadows of like understanding the intent. What is the intent of this case? And then where does it really need to go? But so for our biggest ones, we look at it truly from a customer and understanding what is going on with them.
Good. So let me just wrap up over here. This is some of the takeaways that we've put into today's discussions about, I think maybe in addition, now that I've listened to your story, but really focusing on the outcomes, not so much on the inputs, has been sort of the theme that stuck with me throughout your talk. So thank you for emphasizing that, and thank you for joining us today on the session. Really appreciate the insights you've shared with our community.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
Sure. Bye-bye. We will